Hi, everybody, and welcome to Inside Quest. We're the little black book of mental upgrades. Our goal is to bring on amazing people who can tattoo knowledge directly onto your brain. And if you're looking to ink up your intellect, there's no better guest than the man joining us today. He's a globally recognized speaker focused on leadership, teams, and success in life, but don't let that suit and tie description fool you. This PhD is definitely a crow left of the murder. Covered in more tattoos than most of the members of Motley Crue, this hard-working, Harley-riding former academic has turned being a rebel into a viable business model. Demonstrating a deep understanding of the universal human desire to connect on an authentic level, he has literally and figuratively shown the world his ink, leveraging his credentials, unique message, and biker-inspired style to establish himself as one of the fastest-growing and most sought-after speakers in the world. His authenticity and unparalleled work ethic have earned him several scholarly publications, a prestigious postdoctoral fellowship, and numerous teaching awards. Formerly a tenured professor and the assistant dean for the MBA and executive programs at the nationally ranked Wright State's MBA program, he abandoned the safety of academia for the high-octane world of a hyperactive entrepreneur. He's a speaker, author, trainer, advisor, radio show host, and go-to expert for millions through his library of content on lynda.com, LinkedIn, and YouTube. His catalog of content is legion and has been translated into countless languages, earning him praise from professionals in over 160 countries. His leadership and life insights have been quoted in the New York Times, Time, Forbes, Business Week, U.S. News and World Report, Chicago Tribune, and hundreds of other media outlets. His lectures on leadership are so effective and so polished that he's been brought in to speak by some of the largest companies in the world, including ExxonMobil, State Farm, Ernst & Young, Cox Media, and Medtronic, just to name a few. Please help me in welcoming the man Inc. magazine named as one of the 100 top leadership speakers, the author of Little Black Book of Leadership and Show Your Ink, Dr. Todd Dewett. Thank you so much. Pleasure to have you on. So I think it's safe to say that you don't exactly fit the stereotype of the typical business consultant or speaker. Thankfully. But the thing I want to dive into is the thing that's come to symbolize your authenticity, which is something you speak very powerfully about, your tattoos.
Yeah.
You're a very thoughtful guy, so I've got to imagine that there's reasoning behind your tattoos. Why did you start, and what do they mean to you?
It's an evolution like anything else. When it started, I was a carefree teenager like many people who get a tattoo. There wasn't much thought. There was a process of getting the cojones to sit down and let someone do that to you.
What was the first one?
It's a tribal piece on this arm, which means nothing other than, I'm 19!
In all languages.
In all languages. And then I saw it, I loved it, and I realized what you know, which is it could be more. And that theme actually permeates everything I do now. So yeah, they took on stories and depth of meaning later. But here's the thing, you talk about how I use them now successfully, and I'm lucky to say I do, but it didn't start that way. 12 years ago, I was scared to death that my client was not going to listen deeply to the message because they would be distracted. And what I realized is amazing. This is the amazing part. Ready? Tattoos mean nothing. Tattoos, or any form of expression, means nothing if people are connecting with you because they see purpose in the message.
Right.
So for me, from a marketing perspective, it has a small, useful little hook. The truth is, it would never be useful if they didn't believe in the message. And the lesson that I love to share with people about this little ink journey I've been through is that it's amazing what you can get away with at work if you're good at what you do.
For sure. Yeah, no question. And that's something that, as somebody running a company, at the end of the day, you have problems, right? And you're looking for people that can help you solve those problems. If the people that can help you solve those problems have a teardrop tattoo or tattoos crawling up their neck, so be it. And when we started, because we're a manufacturing company, we were in the inner cities. And we really actually had people with facial tattoos. But it really did, for us, it forced us to say, what are we going to judge people on? Is it going to be sort of the historical past? Is it going to be the way they present themselves? Or is it going to be what they're ultimately capable of? And that turned into a whole ethos within the company of purely looking at not even who the person is today, right? And we tell people that blatantly in an interview. I don't care who you are today. I'm only interested in who you're trying to become, which is pretty fascinating. It goes back to your point about rolling up your sleeves and really being you. So Why do you think people care so much about authentic connection? Like, why is that such a powerful thing?
We live, on average, as human beings, and West and East are both the same. We live ridiculously repressed lives. We wake up every day and try to behave in a way that makes other people go, yeah, I find that acceptable, non-threatening, and okay. And that makes for terribly uninteresting people and terribly truncated relationships based on a shared agreement about social norms that maybe have some value, but frankly we overindulge in. Most people want to show emotion. At work, they don't. Most people want to speak their mind. They fear evaluation. They shut up. So when I think about authenticity, I first got excited watching people react positively to me trying to be a little more raw intentionally. And then I realized people go to work every single day and manage impressions. And they actually do it in a way that's overdone. They try to dress to please the boss. They try to speak to please the boss. They try to do the work in a way they think the boss will like. Number one reason people leave a job voluntarily. Number one, bosses, bad boss relationships. So when you talk about trying to judge people about performance and what they want to become, I love that. But what I have to tell everyone watching the show is that you're not normal at all. Most bosses out there have a belief about what's right, and they're happy, usually unconsciously, to impose it on other people in their employee base every single day. And that's why most cube dwellers, survey after survey after survey, profess to not loving what they do, not feeling purpose, not being engaged, happy to leave for another opportunity if it gives them an extra dime an hour. That's a sad comment. So you could say my mission in a way is to make sure that 20 years from now, you're not rare. More people think that this type of vibe for how we should look at employees as people with a future, not just talent, doing a task now, can be normal instead of rare. That would be my dream.
It's interesting. So you bring up norms, which is something that you talk really eloquently about, and I encourage you guys all, as I do with all the guests that we bring on here, and they get on the show because they're worthy of going and researching. He talks about norms versus rules and regulations, and it would be, I was really impacted by that because I see that here. So we really do have, like you say that, and you're very kind, but that we don't necessarily have a preconceived notion of what's right, but we do, and it's very intense and it's very specific. It just happens to be what I think is liberating to the individual, because that's ultimately what's good for the whole. But we have really intense norms that we reinforce, and this show is one of the ways that we get the norms out. But talk to people about the difference between norms and rules and regulations and how they can, in their own career, leverage that as an up-and-coming leader, which I think is where that distinction becomes really critical.
Well, you have to start the answer by talking about risk. To deviate from expectations, established norms, is a risk for any employee. And if I don't say that, then I'm not being honest, because I want people to make decisions with their eyes open, understanding that all behaviors have consequences. The difference between those two is funny. Norms are not formal. They are sometimes not talked about. They're just evident by watching people do things every day. Certain behaviors are apparent and repeated. Those are norms of behavior. Hey, at this company, we all show up on time for meetings. Those are norms, and sometimes they're enforced a little, sometimes a lot, but they're informal, and they are, according to most research, more powerful in shaping behavior than formal rules and regs, which is why it's hilarious that companies are in love with creating more and more formal bits, rules, regs, guidelines for how we should behave and under what conditions. We know that HR, with the best of intentions, and I love my HR peeps if they're listening, we know that they create bureaucracy with good intentions, but bureaucracy never shapes a team like thoughtful norms and thoughtful conversations about what those norms should be. So for example, when a team's new and gets together, no matter what is in the HR policy book, that group of people should talk about core things they believe in and expect to see out of this team, because those are shared things we can focus on, and then revisit in conversation if behaviors deviate. When a team collectively owns that together, it's radically more powerful than what a bureaucrat wrote in a guide over in HR. Does that make sense?
It does. What's the most effective way, and I know that you talk about this, but what's the most effective way to institutionalize those norms? Because like thinking, as you were talking about HR, and I'm literally imagining the beautiful human beings that run our HR department, and thinking about why they do rules and regs, and they do it so that it becomes transmittable, right? So it's not like I don't even think they would disagree with you. I think that to a large extent, certainly the HR people here would 100% agree that norms are more powerful than rules and regs, but they don't know how to get a norm to spread in a way where you can instantly enculturate somebody, right? without turning it into something formal. So do you have a way to keep it from becoming overly formalized and really true?
There's one best way to do that, and here's where I put you on the spot. Leaders model the way. Your behavior, whether you like it some days or not, has a strong impact on the levels beneath you. And that's one example of a norm. The way you act serves as an expectation setter for others. So here's the norm that will save you from the bureaucracy. The norm is that we don't know everything. We strive to know more tomorrow than we did today, but we don't know everything. And I want to tell you where that comes from for me. So when I think of norms as informal guides, start with, I know we're not perfect. I know we don't know it all, but we're going to start the conversation right here and be open to letting that thing evolve and grow. So you're setting a beginning, a template for everyone to chew on about those values you care about, those goals you have. But if you meaningfully tell them, this is not perfect, and as you grow and achieve and help us grow and achieve, then what I just told you is going to morph in the direction it needs to go. That's humility in the face of not knowing everything, and that's the type of behavior a leader shows that makes them not just want to comply with the rules that you give them, but feel committed to the actual purpose of the organization.
Right. So you come into school, you realize, okay, you think you're sort of hot shit, and then you realize, wait a second, as bright as I am, I have the lowest scores in the building. At that moment, you had to make a mindset decision, right, about whether that was going to be corrosive to your self-esteem or whether you were going to use that to propel you forward and make you work hard. You have an amazing, amazing, amazing story that gave me the chills. I have the chills just now thinking about it, that crystallizes that mindset as a choice when you and your father sat down on the bench. If you would share that, I think that is such a power. Like, I will use that to remind myself of the power of mindset.
It's very kind of you to say that. So my dad was my best friend, and long story short, I didn't like the guy growing up. He was a very accomplished alcoholic. No one liked him. When I was 17 in high school, a boss had pity on him and said, you need to go to rehab, bring us the old Charlie, who we remember, otherwise I'm going to fire you. What's your choice? And like a genius, he said, I'm going to rehab. And so he went to rehab, he got clean, and the guy who walked out shocked us, and we loved him, and he was funny, and he was kind, and I was into about year 10 of loving this unexpected gift in my life, and that's exactly what it was, a ridiculous blessing that changed my life that I never imagined possible. Year 10, he gets cancer, and we started a 2-year journey with him, and that's hard. Anyone in here who's dealt with that knows what I mean. When you find out for the first time with the first call, it takes the air straight out of you.
Sure.
And I walked in, and I did what everyone would expect, hug and cry with mom and dad for 10 minutes.
Right.
And then Dad and I walked down the door together. I'll never forget this. 2 ridiculous extroverts. And the weirdest thing, because we'd had so many long talks as passionate, kind of powerful extroverts. But today, that day, we said nothing. We just walked. And we ended up after an hour saying nothing, which is surreal beyond words and different than anything I'd ever experienced with my dad, my newly found 10-year-old best friend. And then we sat down on this bench because he was tired. He was 73. Doctor said he had 3 weeks if he was lucky. 3 weeks to go if he's lucky. He sits on the bench. He's breathing heavily. I'm sitting next to him. No one's saying anything, which is bizarre. And finally, I did what people do. I started thinking negative thoughts. We've all been there when you're trying to process that thing about your loved one that you just wish you didn't have to deal with. Anger, blame, confusion, it's all roiling through me. And I'm lost in that haze. I don't know how long, a few minutes. And then he explained that he too had gone through the negativity. He sat there and watched me on my face go through. But he wanted me to know that it was okay, that there's a better way. He was over that. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're over that. And he said, well, I have this situation. The doctors are very clear. There's nothing that can be done about it. And that's unfortunate. And I could be mad, angry because I'm not going to watch your kids grow up, angry because I'm not going to walk out to that pond and go fishing the way I love to, angry because I'm not going home many more times to see that woman after 40 plus years I still love. I could be angry. I did that. I'm done. He goes, how I choose to feel about it is entirely, completely, wholly, and utterly up to me. I could be angry. I did that. Or I could be happy. And I said, happy? He said, no, thrilled. Why not? You know why? I'm sitting here right now doing the thing in life I love the most. I'm talking to my best friend. I was blessed to watch a guy at a pivotal moment have option A, option B, and realize that it's not ridiculous, easy to dismiss pop psychology. Glass half full is a core life philosophy. If you don't do that, I don't expect much out of you. My dad did that, and it shaped everything I've done since then, and it shaped his life. They gave him 3 weeks. Dad lived for over 2.5 years, as you know from reading the story, which was radically unexpected, and the doctors were baffled. And more than one of them pulled me aside at some point to say, I can't prove it, but I know the best explanation for his unexpected longevity is the fact that he woke up every day and made the choice to frame that deal glass half full. So when you talk about norms, it's really about walking the talk. And that guy in that instance learned to walk the talk in a way that profoundly changed me. It made me convinced for the first time in my life that serious transformation is possible.
The whole story about your dad, which you go into great detail in your book, is amazing, and really I think is a tremendous example of your ability to really connect, to be raw, to be real in a story, and to walk people through the emotional roller coaster. And he does it in real time, which is like a really profound way to share a story. So you go with him on that ride, which makes that sort of ultimate punch at the end of mindset as a choice that much more powerful. So talk a little bit about the trophy generations that we're raising, and
are they sitting in the audience right now?
That's a great question. That's something that culturally we don't get into, so I like to think we attract people that don't fall prey to that, but I think it's a thing. I think it's real.
It's a real thing. So I fell in love with studying basic notions about people, especially people at work, and great leaders and how they make effective teams. And it turns out that big body of research, back when I was still trying to be a scholar, is really 99% applicable to people in general. The one you just brought up is a great example. It used to be 40, 50 years ago that the idea of giving someone an award, a trophy, a ribbon, whatever, was associated very clearly with an achievement that was interesting. Slowly but surely, and it started in the 60s, there was some research that suggested that if you will affirm young people with attaboys and way to goes, that they will feel better about themselves, and that will bear fruit for them as an adult being productive and successful. That's kind of true, kind of not true. I'll spare you the research except to say, when that finding and that research became public, every average person in the world, especially our country, fell in love with that notion, and we started thanking and praising and woohoo and our little kids for everything they did. The participation generation is what they call it. Right. We've been doing that for so long. Kids in Little League who don't do anything other than finish the season. Well, I've written this before. I'll pick on my youngest. His name's Parker. First year he played t-ball. He was not good. His team was not good. But at the end of the year, who received a trophy? Every little kid on that team. And what did they learn? And usually when I say that, an audience says, nothing. And the answer is far worse than nothing. They learned, I breathe, therefore I'm awesome.
Right.
And that's a horrifying lesson to teach a young person if you want them to understand goal achievement in life. We've been doing this so long that people just like Tom have to go to work and deal with a generation of people coming into their offices who went through Little Leagues getting trophies that they didn't necessarily earn. Now it's a generation of what I think of as trophy employees. They think, hey, I showed up on time for 6 months. Isn't that meritorious? I need a raise. Right. We have forgotten what it means to connect the use of recognition and rewards with the production of excellence. It's not just good enough to meet standards consistently and be acceptable, and no, we forgot what it means to use rewards in a way that makes people care, pay attention, and want to fight hard for it again. And that only works when you associate it with the production of something special.
What'd you do with your son's trophy?
After arguing with his mother,
as every good story begins.
After arguing with his mother, Tom, we agreed to allow him to keep it if I was also allowed to engage him in a realistic dialogue about this topic. And now my two boys, I'm proud to say this, as crazy as it sounds to some people, I'm so proud to say this, they are still strivers. They're 8 and 12. They're still working hard. They understand leaving it all on the field, those notions of trying hard. And they're happy to see that ribbon of that trophy, but they can tell you in their own words that it's not as good as when you actually got one for first place. They understand that participation is different than excellence, and that makes me sleep well at night.
Why encourage your kids to strive for excellence? What's the point?
What I'm about to say is not controversial in the least. It is well known that we don't educate kids worth a darn. In terms of international comparison studies with other industrialized countries, we're mediocre in some places, very poor in a lot of other places. So I watch what we do to kids. And what do we do to kids? We teach them to think within an increasing number of constraints about how to follow rules to stay out of trouble. What we know about every Oprah who's ever been studied as a successful person, and we've studied successful people a lot, is that they took risks, they questioned, they thought critically, they did not fear and shun the creativity that showed up in their brain time and again. What we do to kids is the opposite of that. Around the 3rd grade, this is a historical, well-known thing, the 3rd grade slump. You measure kids with all kinds of cognitive tests. Parents, how many parents in here? A lot of parents, you gotta love this. We measure kids with a lot of tests about their intellect and their creativity, and around the 3rd grade on the creativity portion, you see it plateau and sometimes fall for kids consistently. Why? Well, around the 3rd grade is when we start piling on the homework seriously. Around the 3rd grade is where their limited cognitive capacity, and we all have limited cognitive capacity, gets tired of following this increasing number of constraints. It gets worse throughout every level of our life. The things that, to avoid chaos, we put constraints on ourselves. Then we go to college, and college used to be about fun self-exploration. No, now it's about getting internships so you're viable in the job market. We've actually taken constraints a million different ways to help us stay out of the chaos, but what it's done, and this is predictable, is made our brains just kind of not care as much about creativity. So when I look at my kids, I think about minimal rules that matter, and you can't violate them, and there should be consequences. But then most of the time, you got to bite your teeth and try to give them room to screw up, to laugh, to learn, to play, to experiment, to find their imagination at work. And we don't do that with kids. We actually set up an educational system that does the opposite. And I'm one of literally thousands of voices that have just said what I've said. The question for me, I put it to you, what has to happen before as a country we say our #1 war, Lord knows we like making wars on stuff in this country, whether it's drugs or obesity, right? #1 war should be on education. And as a father, I mean that more passionately than ever because it's quite mediocre and we know based on models in other countries how we can do it better.
There's a lot in that. So we're gonna jump into the deep end here without any sort of life preserver and see if we can make some magic happen. So the first question that I would ask, that I don't have kids, don't plan to have kids, so I haven't spent a lot of time researching childhood brain development, but I'm gonna guess that something else is happening around that age, which is an increased level of development in the prefrontal cortex, where these kids can actually begin to hinder their own creativity. They have a desire to fit in based on an awareness of their surroundings, because whenever I see something that's universal, I really, really doubt that there's not something innate neurologically that leads to that. So for instance, I'm a big believer in evolutionary psychology.
Me too.
Not saying that it's all right, I'm just saying it gives an interesting framework with which to view the world and see how people act. So if I look at something that's universal, like, hey, at 3rd grade, for whatever reason, kids tend to start declining in creativity, I'm gonna ask, why would that be advantageous, right? Because
very Darwinian.
Backing it up, right? So is it possible that the reason that that's happening is if you got rejected by the group back in the savannah, you got eaten. So being rejected by the group was truly a matter of life and death. And that one of the most profound things that you can learn is to fit in and blend in and not be seen. Because that's what I think we're actually up against. And so I don't tie it to the education system, I guess because I've escaped and I don't have kids.
You chose that word well, though. You said you escaped.
Yes, and I would never
go back.
One
escapes a prison.
One does escape a prison, and that is how it felt for me, for sure. And I was very good at school. I knew both how to use charisma and bonding with a teacher to graduate advanced mathematics without ever learning any advanced mathematics. Sad but true, right? And trust me, that is, I do not say that with pride. There was a time in my life when I would have said that with pride, but only to learn that that's now biting me in the ass, and I actually wish I knew how to do math at a much higher level. But when I say I did well at school, it doesn't mean that I was academic. It just means I understood the entire umwelt of the human experience. And I could see, I can bond with this person. There are things that I can leverage in my relationship to get what I want. And then as I went into college and realized I needed to study, just my profound, almost autistic ability to focus.
Let me be rude and stop you, because you mentioned something awesome just a second ago, which was nature-nurture.
Yeah.
And I think, Todd, there's something going on in the You're right. It's not, is it possible? The question is it likely? And the answer is very much a yes. What we know, just to use the most common example about personality, is that it's not nature or nurture, it's both. Give or take around 50-50, according to the scientists who study this. You get a lot from your genetics, and then you learn a lot and develop and experiment a lot socially, and then your final product, usually cemented around late adolescence, is a product of both. The third grade slump is no different. Yes, there's things going on biologically that make them more aware, fearful for the first time, etc. But you can socialize people in a direction that you want them to go. For example, there's been lots of studies of creativity, which was my first area as an academician. You tell people, I want you to work on this task and give me a creative response. Really creative. Think outside the box, go, and you give them this task. Give this group over here, who statistically look just like this group, the same task. Hey, do your best, give me an outcome. But you don't tell them to focus on creativity. Run a bunch of trials. I'm just giving you a simple example.
Yeah, no, I love this.
You will see the creative group who had the creative goal be more creative. Is it because they're more creative people? Absolutely not. It's because we've given them a social focus that matters, and they strive to meet that. Right. That's a good example. I mean, you're on the money. Things are happening biologically. The question is, regardless of biology, are we doing the things socially around that kid that will push him in what we know long term to be the most productive direction? And the answer is usually no. We're teaching them to be fearful of their shadow.
So now let me see, because in the nature versus nurture debate, the only thing I care about ultimately is nurture. So I am so ridiculously far into that camp as to be offensive to most. The reason that I bring up the nature element is, if you're going to be a race car driver, if you don't understand the physics of the car, aerodynamics, and the road, you can't get as good as you need to get. Intuition and practice will take you to a certain level, but if you can codify and you know, just the best way to learn something is to teach it, right? When you have to teach it and really understand how it works, you develop a much deeper and more profound knowledge. So the reason it's important for them, because ultimately I want to make every guest I bring, every topic we cover is meant to make this useful in their lives. I find that people spend most of their time on the second half of saying, oh my God, like my creativity is being stifled and I really want to get out from under that. But they don't understand how they got there in the first place. And until you guys understand like what's going on from a neurological perspective, I was talking to somebody yesterday, doesn't matter who, and I started talking about the brain and neurology. And my wife's looking at me because she knows what we were doing. And the person was like, why do you know this? Right? Because it's so far outside of technically what I do on paper. And I said, look, this is how any level of success that you're going to ascribe to me is one thing and one thing only. I am utterly obsessed with the brain. I'm utterly obsessed with neurology and why we do what we do, precisely so that we can manipulate it. And the most beautiful part of being a human being is the ability to transcend nature. Right? As far as I'm concerned, we're the only animal that can truly transcend their nature. Now, you can take that all the way out to artificial intelligence and literally jacking into the matrix. And if you guys don't know how real that shit is becoming, do yourself a favor and look it up. It is crazy.
Absolutely coming.
And just like you or me, like right now saying, what are the elements that I want to rise above? So the reason I think it's important to understand that is so that you guys know you're going to perceive yourself here, sad as that makes me, and other places that people are trying to stifle your creativity, and maybe they really are. But to his point, which he's going to talk about now powerfully regarding excuses, that doesn't help you, right? So if you know how you're here, now you can figure out how to transcend it. So tell these guys about why excuses aren't going to serve them.
Well, excuses are easy way outs of anything you don't understand, or put it this way, every outcome is multi-determined. I'm stealing from an old professor friend. So when you did not get the promotion, or the project did not go well, or the client did not say yes, that's not explained by one thing. Very often, to make ourselves feel good and move on, we will say it's about one thing. Bob was an idiot. Whatever the thing was, or the boss was horrible and made a bad presentation. It's certainly not about me. We usually attribute that to something else. It's extremely common across all of humanity. We know that historically true as well. It's also something I think of as a disease that you can get rid of. Number one, you got to admit you got it. Number two, you got to learn to laugh at it, because if you can't laugh, self-improvement is a painful journey, because we're all ridiculously imperfect. So I may have an acronym. I thought to myself, how can I laugh at this? And I'm dealing with a bunch of MBA students who are sometimes too stiff, and so I want to make them laugh a little bit. And I said, I came up with this acronym: BLAME, barely legitimate, almost meaningless excuse. And then I realized, because like you, using salty language whenever you want to in a classroom, I could too, so I made up a rated R version: bullshit, lame-ass, meaningless excuse. The MBAs loved that, and it's been resonating with professionals ever since. Once you admit you do that like every human, once you learn to laugh at it, you can start to say, what can I do to understand how I was part, maybe not all, but part of that outcome I did not like, and then what can I do differently next time to ensure that it's not the same outcome? What I just described to you is a ridiculously simple cognitive approach to changing that natural tendency. I love to say people with excuses are afraid to work hard. I love to say that. An excuse gives you a reason to stop working hard. And what we know about anyone ever worth writing an article about is that they worked until they dropped to the point of alienating people around them. And if you are a user of excuses, you'll never work that hard.
I like that, a user of excuses, as you tap your veins. You said something in that triggered, it's relatively random, but there's a word you use, imperfect, and you have this concept of imperfect balance in terms of finding a job. I want to read one of your quotes, which I think is absolutely incredible, and it'll be our jumping off point. If you listen to nothing else, boys and girls, listen to this. You need to find a high-fit job, one that aligns very well with your skills, interests, and values. Not one that others think is good for you, not one that others feel is prestigious, not one you cling to because it pays so well. No, I'm talking about one that gives you purpose, one you like and often love. If that sounds too simplistic or lofty, fine. Feel free to settle for a job you merely tolerate and endure. God, I love that. Why did you feel it necessary to say?
Because I'm one of the escapees like you, and most aren't. And so our job is twofold: to take the people who fit better within the worlds guys like us create and make their experiences purposeful as possible, and to simultaneously stimulate and motivate the minority of people who by disposition with the right nudge will in fact be escapees as well. I love having that as an outcome. I watch people live for the weekend. They go to work, they say yes sir when they don't mean it. And I got that, it'll be done, when they don't mean it. And I call that disgusting and sad and awful, and so much of life just wasted. So when I talk to people, I talk, especially to young people, I talk about being willing to offend people who love you. If you have any chance of living up to that quote, you will sometimes be not pleasing people who love you. You know how many accountants I've met that have pulled me aside and say, thank you, I cried a little today. I thought thoughts I didn't allow myself to think for the last several years. Today, I want to act on them, but I'm scared because I make so much money, because I've got a car payment, because my wife and best friends all think I've got a cool existence, etc., etc., etc. We create barriers, and I firmly believe half or more of those constraints that stop us from taking big risks, we take on knowing there are going to be reasons later we can say, no, that would be a bad risk. I don't want to take that risk, whatever that new career twist might be, instead of embracing it and laughing and learning when you fall down occasionally. We're back to learning from failure, because young people need to know that falling on your face is 100% predictable, and for the smart people, it's what they learn from that later makes them fall far less frequently than everyone else. But we're still socialized to believe that that's a stigma and a shame upon us, which is the opposite of the truth.
It's interesting that you talk about people misunderstanding what's actually good for them and the thing that they actually need to get what they want. Talk about that study of the devil's advocate, where they broke people up into two groups and one had the devil's advocate.
So you got a researcher, they go into a room, they've got a bunch of people, professionals, and they give them a task to work on. Hey guys, here's this task, read this piece of paper here, and I want you to come up with really creative answers, go. And then they go into this other room, bunch of people look just like these people, and they give them the same task. Hey guys, I want you to work on this task, come up with creative outcomes. Now, the only difference between these two is that this group has one person as a member of the group who is a Confederate. That's a person who works for the researcher. Now, nobody knows that. Just the researcher and the Confederate. That guy's been given a role to play. Hey, I want you to go in there and be the devil's advocate. Question people. Say, how come? What if? Did you think? Play the devil's advocate. So you run these trials and you bring in some experts to judge the outcomes that come out of these groups. What do you think you find? Time and again, the group with the devil's advocate is judged to have superior, more creative outcomes to this task. Makes sense, makes a lot of sense. And then the researcher walks back in, this is hilarious, and says, great stuff, we're going to do just a few more trials, but first, I want each group to fire one person. Which person do they fire? The devil's advocate. Every time they fire the guy who was cantankerous and spoke up and gave them an edge, and they rerun the trials and bring in the experts, and their performance advantage is gone. Versions of what I just described happen at work all the time. because people talk a good talk. I call it the creativity and innovation rhetoric gap. They talk a great talk about the need to do what we do differently and better tomorrow. And then they're faced with the nature of having difficult conversations, which is the backbone of change and improvement, and they crumble and go, could you just shut up and do it the way we've always done it?
Yeah. You talk about companies need to hire the rebel rouser.
Sure.
I thought that was pretty interesting to look for. I think you say 5 to 10% of your workforce should be round pegs and square holes. Why is that so effective?
It's not proven yet that it's effective for one reason and one reason only. We're still in a very early stage, last couple decades tops, of people saying things like that. And for that to be successful, we know that you can't just plant a seed in a weird place. You have to prepare the soil for that seed. So we've slowly started to say derivative thinkers in a minority are going to be useful. So if you were to put a rabble rouser, a rebel, in there, do you think that group would go, I'm so glad you're here? No, they would look at them strange, just like they did in high school if you didn't fit in the clique. So one of the first insight is we need a minority of different thinkers, well-credentialed, well-trained, but different thinkers who don't just look like our prototype here at work. Number two, and this is the tougher part of it, you have to go make sure that where they're going to land, who they're going to interact with, who's going to lead them and manage them, understands why you're hiring that person. You have an expectation of them to help this person plant some more seeds and become productive, because if you don't, natural human tendencies take over. It happens at work every day. The only thing you can do is hire people who are conscious enough to act intentionally against those behavioral tendencies to create new norms. That's the best shot you've got.
Creating new norms, rocking the status quo. Tell us a little bit about blowing bubbles.
That's so funny. So I used to teach a course to graduate students on creativity.
Yep.
I wanted them to get personally more comfortable, at least a little bit, with taking risks. And so I'd make them do things you would never expect students in a graduate business program to do. One of them was blowing bubbles. So this was one of my first big wins with these kids. They were awesome. So I brought in a bunch of bubbles and I said, here's the rules. You can use these. You must use these, but I want you to leave the room and go roam the business school, walking around, and just blow bubbles. Share these awesome bubbles with other people and be careful to observe how they react. I want you to do this and watch how they react. Now, if you really want to impress me without knocking, you'll just open a few doors where other classes are in session and walk in and start sharing some bubbles with those people too. And they all looked at me just like I'm insane, but they knew a grade was on the line. One brave soul, only one, the first time I ever did it, walked into another in-session classroom where an econ professor was having class and walked in and smiled like a big goof. Hey, and started blowing bubbles. And everyone in the class looked peculiar, and someone said, do it. They all knew it came from my class, but it made a point, and those students left that class understanding that those types of deviations are necessary and come with a cost. You have to use them, but use them at your own risk.
Yeah, it's that cost that I find so interesting. You know, we talk so much on this show about the changes that you want to make in your own life, not to be squished into a box, to really accomplish the things that you want, but we really don't do the follow-up in terms of what's going to happen when you do that. What are going to be the reactions? What are you going to run into? What do you need to be prepared for? And that bubble story, I felt really cut to the heart of the reaction that you need to expect from other people, that you're going to get, in some cases, fairly violent pushback, which goes back to norms, which then reminds me of how powerful it is for people to reinforce the norms of the group and then choose wisely, right? You want to pick a group that has norms that move you towards what you want to be, and you talk about that. You say when you're going into a group, analyze how those people are, because you know, the chances of going in and shaking them up versus going in and having them shake you up, you're probably going to be the one to get shaken up, and how that change happens over time and needing to be very careful about who you pick.
Well, this is why when you're in the first third of your career, you do need to spend time trying to understand who you are as a person, and I mean personality assessments. Understand inherently what your dispositions tend to be. Some people, by dispositions, are awesomely, smart to go to be an accountant and to learn the world of rule following that is accounting. And I love those guys. They have a place. They make our companies work. Right. Other people, by disposition, are more likely to find that high fit when they chase the tech startup at the other extreme. For a guy who's a thinker like you, it might be simple. For most people, front third of their career, awesome clarifier. Most people have a vague, cloudy notion when they're in that front third. They're not happy with that second job now. I'm 26, but I don't know where I should go. That cloudy cloudy knowledge that I'm not supposed to be here, but I don't know where to go.
Right.
Such as the 2 paths I just talked about a minute ago. Those tools, conversations with people who have clarity and maybe want to help in terms of mentoring, and those tools, such as the Parachute book, are awesome to take that cloud of possibilities and distill it down a little more so that you don't have to ask yourself, am I making the right decision by jumping into that industry? Well, you figured it out before you were 30. So for the rest of your career, you have great confidence that you're supposed to play in that space over there. Most people are too scared. And then they're 35 and 40 and they're saying, I think I really want to go over there. But they never took a risk. They stayed in the same first job, first industry they ever had because it was safe. And now they don't think they have the knowledge or the cojones to jump when they're 35 because of that mortgage and the 2 kids. My job is to get people to believe that more is possible when they're 35 and 40. It's not the end of the world, and if you got the right wife or right husband or whatever the case may be, they will support you. But more importantly, to get that 20-something group, we can't stop making fun of the millennials. I have great hope in them that they're going to fix a great deal of what I find to be unproductive systems inside corporate America. So I want them to take that front third and actually experiment like crazy so that when they're where you and I are, they're running ships of people who are more aligned, feeling purpose and productive than we are today.
Have you read the book, Be So Good They Can't Ignore You?
No.
It's a really interesting book about how passion isn't enough and that there's sort of a mythology that passion is the only thing that you need and that you go searching for your passion one day and you find it. And basically the moral of his story isn't that passion isn't useful, it's just that passion is cultivated and it's not something that's hidden in a box in the back of your closet, it's something that you have to cultivate. And the title comes from a quote from Steve Martin, who said that was basically his strategy in life, was to become so good that people couldn't ignore him. The author makes a very compelling argument that what you really need to be focusing on if you're trying to find that great fit, if you're trying to find something that you're really passionate about, if you're trying to clarify in the first third of your career, you clarify it by gaining expertise, which is obviously something that is very meaningful in your worldview, but that as you get better, that sense of purpose will grow into a sense of real passion for what you're doing, but it only comes as you actually acquire
experiences.
Yeah, like experiences and getting talented.
I want more people to become try junkies. We are fearful of trying. I want more try junkies. Start a company that only costs you $5K when you're 18 or 22 instead of wondering whether you should risk a second mortgage to start at a larger scale business and quit your... You might do that, but you're supposed to learn the ins and outs of that when you're 15 to 25, in my opinion. We've got to get more people to embrace that. Try is cool. Fail, part of the deal. So what? Guess what I'm going to try next. If we could get people to understand what I just said, our economy, I swear to you, would be different in 20 years.
Awesome. With that, my friend, I will thank you for joining us. This was absolutely incredible.
My pleasure.
Guys, thank you so much. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of Inside Quest. This has been amazing. The notion of creating a generation of people who try, that is the key. Get out there, figure out what you want in life, cultivate it. It isn't something that you're going to dig around and search for and find. And the most important thing, the thing that rocked me to my core as I was researching this man, is the very notion that your mindset is totally controllable. If his father could look at cancer and break out laughing and realize I've got a choice as to how I spend my days, no matter what square hole you think your round peg is trying to fit into, you can change your mindset and find something beautiful and something that you enjoy in that and take control of your life, and from there really build something spectacular. Don't be afraid to show your ink, figure out who you are, and connect with the world authentically. That is an absolute joy in this world, and I think one of the things that will empower you most in your lives. So go check this guy out. You can find him all over the internet. You can find him on YouTube. He's got great Facebook, Twitter, which the handles are?
@Fuel4Leaders.
@Fuel4Leaders. You guys won't regret it. It's a lot of fun. He's got 2 books out. You're going to want to read them both. Little Black Book of Leadership and Show Your Ink, both of which are utterly fantastic. You're really going to enjoy them. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. If you're not already checking out the podcast, if you're not driving, listening to this bad boy at 2 or 3x right now, know that you can find it on iTunes. And listen to it at your leisure. And if you guys want to be here in the audience, we have tickets. You can go to InsideQuest.com. You can follow me at Tom Bilyeu. And until next week, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Thank you, my friend.
Pleasure,
Absolute pleasure to have you. This is wonderful.
Coming up next, Inside Questions.
You've been around the world, you know a lot of people. Who has it right?
Answer your question is the same way I look at people. Are you friends only with people who completely and utterly agree with you issue by issue, value by, no. If we looked that way, we'd be pretty lonely. You have to see if there's at least some decent overlap and cherry pick and appreciate what you like in them. The same is true with the larger systems around the globe. No one's perfect, but if we learn from each other, which we're only mediocre at best right now, we might have a decent planet in another 100 years.